Chapter 4. I Want to Be Rich. It is the year 1985, or 1986. Put it like this, my mom regularly teases my bangs for me before I get on the school bus every morning. It is my brother's birthday. They're twins, 5 years older than I am. In an absolute baller move, my parents and I pick them up from Hebrew school in a stretch limo. Oh, yeah, I guess she is Jewish. Imagine us showing up to Temple Beth El in some long-ass Lincoln, complete with sunroof and tinted windows, watching the other kids gawk at the car, eager to determine what incredibly important person could be inside. Then the driver, who in my head looks like Alfred from Batman, steps out and calls my brother's names. Imagine having that kind of clout. What celebrities my brothers were, even for one glorious moment. The limo takes us to one of Jersey Shore's fanciest restaurants, or at least as fancy as I've ever seen. Cream-colored napkins, folded into fan shapes at each place setting, empty wine glasses placed around the table, tiny little plates to the sides of the main plates, which I'm told will be for bread and that will soon be served. A lavishly appointed chandelier, and out the window behind it you can see the scum-tinged darkness of the Atlantic Ocean. It's only when I look around the restaurant and watch the adults sitting at other tables that I realize something's wrong. The other diners are ostensibly being fancy and having sophisticated conversations, but all the while they are dining on, slurping down what appears to be actual monsters. I watch in horror as grown adults, who are for some reason all wearing bibs, pull apart the bodies of terrifying sea creatures, feasting on the meat inside. To this day, I do not eat lobster. Oh, Jesus. I'm missing out. Okay, in the 1980s, it seemed like everyone wanted to be rich above all else, and I was no exception. Overconsumption was sold to me like a sugary cereal during Saturday morning cartoons, or the fanciest toy in the Sharper Image catalog. Some advanced looking tchotchke, that's a good word, tchotchke, it's like a knick-knack, that would make my life increasingly better if my parents would just simply buy me one more, please. On TV, lifestyles of the rich and famous touted jacuzzis and waterbeds and mega yachts, and on my brother's bedroom walls were centerfolds of models on some tropical beach, draping themselves across Ferraris and Lamborghinis. Speaking of water sports, this is also the era that brought us Donald Trump and his gold toilet. But my revulsion with shellfish slurpers that day was my very first inkling that there might be something disgusting about accumulating wealth in excess. It would take many more years for me to realize that the hoarding of wealth is a sign of moral depravity, not business acumen. Until then, my conception of the American dream was that anyone in this country could work hard and acquire a bunch of stuff, and it was the stuff, what kind and how much, that was ultimately a sign of one's worth as a person. Anyone with enough fortitude and ambition could become Scrooge McDuck, diving into his massive pile of gold, coins, and jewels. The wealth gap would have to grow increasingly dire before I would come to believe that in a just world, billionaires like Scrooge wouldn't exist at all. Growing up in the New Jersey suburbs, I obsessed with the idea of what it might be like to be a zillionaire. I love to hear my mom's stories about her great uncle Barney. Barney lived on Park Avenue in New York City and always traveled by chauffeured limousine. My great uncle opened the eponymous men's clothing store in 1923 on 7th Avenue and 17th Street in Chelsea. And over the next decades of the 20th century, it would evolve into an iconic department store and worldwide fashion destination. Wait, so your family is rich? Barney's was a particular kind of rags to riches success story, one that I'll call the Jewish American dream. You start out selling schmadas and end up the scion of an elite family business that over 3 generations becomes a cultural institution that even WASPs admire and envy. WASP stands for White Anglo-Saxon, White Anglo-Saxon person. So like a non-Jewish white person. Barney's was the epitome of the kind of glamour I coveted, but could never attain as a young woman. In its heyday, it was, according to New York fashion critic Vanessa Friedman, unabashedly elitist, proudly exclusionary, you got it or you didn't. And if you didn't, that was your problem, not theirs. And imbued with an arrogance that at a certain point began to chafe. That relative of mine could be such utter snobs was a triumph and proof that the American dream was alive and well. Like a Jewish Pygmalion, Barney had lost its Yiddishisms and grown into an elegant cultural force. This was assimilation in its most successful form. So it stopped being Jewish and started being capitalist. Just like me, my Jewish ancestors wanted both, lots of it. In my youth, I was in 3 different productions of Fiddler on the Roof. I played Sprinza twice, Chava once. I don't know who that is. So I was very much aware of the tribulations of the shtetl life. I don't know what that is. And also how unflattering babushkas were, that's grandmas, then and now for girls with chubby cheeks. In the face of persecution, the desire to be rich seemed more than logical. It was about survival, power. Money unburdens you from the tides of history. It gives you agency to do or not do as you please. It frees you to bitty bum all day long, as post-pubescent Tevius might have sung and still sing on school stages all across the tri-state area. But the Jewish American dream has a consequence that we don't often talk about. Even in the 20th century, when the promise of security in America was more attainable than it ever was, and might ever be again, who knows, I'm not an economist. Those who were able to lift themselves out of poverty and persecution to a more than comfortable life were often still unable to relax and enjoy the spoils. Work became an obsession, and the impulse to hoard, so rational in times of deprivation, becomes noxious in times of abundance. And of course, the 2nd or 3rd generation gets their outsized inheritance without needing to have done any of the work. I'm looking at you, Sackler family. Sacklers own Purdue Pharma, the drug company that got everyone addicted. Not a lick of acumen was required. Gold coin pool for all. Early in his career, my great-great-uncle was known as the cut-rate clothing king, which is another way I know that paying full retail price isn't in my DNA. Barney's literally made its fortune by selling brand name men's clothing at heavily discounted prices and focusing on innovative advertising like calling all men to Barney's spot in the style of Dick Tracy radio show. Legend has it that Barney pawned his wife's wedding ring in order to open a store in Chelsea. The store's motto at the time was a pure tribute to the Lower East Side roots. No bunk, no junk, no imitations. My great-grandfather, Samuel Pressman, was Barney's brother. When Barney opened the store on 17th Street, Samuel worked there too. Samuel's Hebrew name was Tompkins Shmuel, so at the store everyone called him Tommy. My mother grew up going from her home in Jersey City to Chelsea to call on her grandfather whenever a man in the family needed a suit. She remembers that as a child, the store seemed much less intimidating than uptown departments like Saks. When I walked into that store, she told me, I had an enormous sense of pride that my family had started a big business in New York and that my great-uncle's name in big bold letters above the door. I was treated like a little princess by my relatives who worked there and their associates. In the 1960s, Barney's son Fred started to take the store in an entirely new, decidedly more upscale direction. Fred is credited with bringing Giorgio Armani's tailoring to the Americans in the 1970s. He also initiated the opening of a women's store in Barney's, in which his son, Gene, is credited with having built into a nexus for luxury and unique fashions. The store where my mother played with the three-way mirrors in the free alterations era was changing quickly. Barney was about to become bigger than my mom's side of the family had ever imagined, and it would become too big. One of my favorite tropes in childhood and now is the shopping spree montage. A glorious woman is weighed down with shopping bags from all the most glamorous stores, having breezed through and picked out all the best merchandise, usually to the tune of some empowering pop song. This woman experiences no dressing room angst at the Contempo Casuals because her legs are too short, her waist too unwieldy to fill out the form. Her body matches her credit card limit with proportions inaccessible to the average human. Vivian in Pretty Woman and Cher in Clueless were my superheroes. By the 1980s, Barney's wasn't as lavish in a Wall Street, greed is good kind of way. It was also cool. Visionary, really. In 1986, the same year my whole family made a trip to Manhattan to find bar mitzvah suits for my older brothers, Simon Doonan was hired as the window dresser at Barney's, beginning his career of making eccentric, over-the-top creations that made pedestrians stop and gawk. 1986 was also when upstart models Naomi Campbell, Christy Turlington, and Linda Evangelista were featured in Barney's ads, and that November, the store hosted Decorated Denim, a high-profile auction in which Barney's commissioned artists to modify Levi's denim jackets and sold them to benefit AIDS research. Models included Madonna and Iman, wearing denim that had been embellished by Paloma Picasso, Keith Haring, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Andy Warhol. I know some of those people. In 1980s, Barney still feels like the closet a luxury fashion retailer has gone to, making actual art, or at least coexisting with art in a non-slimy way. You would think a trip to Barney's would be thrilling for me, and it was, much later. But for all my childhood fantasies of shopping sprees, especially ones with Madonna's Material Girl playing in the background, when I think back to my trips to great-great-uncle Barney's store, I have no memories of such lavishness. Barney's may have been transformed from simple clothing store to cultural phenomenon, but my parents still primarily used Barney's as a place to buy men's suits. My favorite activity at Barney's was squatting on the floor in the men's department to play underneath the hanging suits, letting the dress pants whip my face like they were wipers at a car wash and I was a dirty Buick. We did get a 15% off family discount, but that got us just about nowhere because 15% off increasingly unaffordable clothes was still unaffordable. I wish I could tell you about Barney's in its glory days, its avant-garde designer clothing and opulent displays, but in truth, my strongest memory of going there as a child has nothing to do with the store or its windows. It's the grilled cheese I get at the hole-in-the-wall diner next door, the name of which has been lost to time. Later, I would read about Fred's, the restaurant named after Barney's son, where all the city's big shots would go to have their power lunches. I'm sure the salade Nicose, or God forbid lobster, was great. But to me, nothing could be better than that grilled cheese. Barney's continued to grow in cultural cachet in the 1990s. In November 2019 article of Vogue, Steph Yotka writes, more than just a place to discover Rick Owens leather jackets and Proenza Schuller's bustiers, Barney's acted as a connective tissue in the New York creative scene. It was where the in-the-know people went to shop, more upscale, whimsical, and international. The store carried unique products that patrons from all over the world came to purchase. Barney's was the first American store to carry product lines from Christian Louboutin, Azzedine Alaïa, and Yohji Yamamoto, among other designers. Barney's grandchildren, my very distant cousins whom I have never met, were running the store at the time and adding their own personal touches. In 1993, Gene and Bob Pressman spent approximately $185 million on a new flagship store on Madison Avenue and 61st Street. Just a few years later, the store in Chelsea that I visited as a child closed. Meanwhile, the enormous expansion, new stores opened everywhere from Houston to Tokyo, weighed on the finances of the privately held company, and the family lost control of Barney's after its first bankruptcy filing in 1996. At the time, I was working part-time at The Gap in Monmouth Mall, using my employee discount to set aside clothes that I would bring to college. I followed along with the news over the years. In 2004, my distant relatives sold their remaining interest in the company, even as the Uptown location was thriving. Still, the brand continued to grow and evolve, and Barney's was still a cultural force as we entered the new century. Just consider the generations of TV fashionistas who shopped there over the decades. The cast of Mad Men, the ladies of Sex and the City, the ladies of Gossip Girl. In 2007, I moved to a 500 square foot studio apartment in Chelsea, not too far from the original Barney's store. The space had become a Loehmann's, a luxury discount store that suited my needs perfectly. I would spend hours in bad lighting picking through racks of $40 dresses the same way I imagined other, more elegant women would rummage through cardboard boxes at Barney's famous warehouse sale to find $800 designer sweaters discounted to $500. I would try to find my findings in the shabby Loehmann's communal dressing rooms, where women of all shapes and sizes and backgrounds competed for mirror space. And I would delight in getting a Loehmann's receipt that would show me exactly how much money I'd saved off the retail price. I think I still have one where I saved 85% on a Nicole Miller dress. By the time Barney's returned to its old Chelsea space for a short run starting in 2016, I was too busy mourning the loss of Loehmann's to be excited about the homecoming. As the years went on, Barney's splendor continued to degrade. Its ownership changed hands several times from retail corporation to hedge funds, which watered down its identity. According to the New York Times, a 2010 renovation made Barney's look more like its rivals, as fish tanks and mosaics were swapped out for generic marble. Then the company went bankrupt and was liquidated by a blur of corporations and hedge funds and financial firms, which seemed to be the fatal conclusion of a lot of American dreams these days. Watching Barney's dissolve into a hodgepodge of capital still felt like an enormous personal loss, even though I could never afford to shop there myself. In 2019, Barney's filed for bankruptcy for the second time and was sold off for parts. The financial firm B. Riley Financial held a liquidation sale at Barney's at the end of the year, and what remained of the store was a motley collection of leftovers and everything must go signs. In January of 2020, the New York Times reported that since November, employees at Barney's flagship at Madison Avenue had been in limbo, lacking basic information about the store's closing date, severance pay, and their benefits. The welfare of the sales force, which used to be revered and well compensated for its personalization and panache, according to my mom at least, began to seem like an afterthought. Saks Fifth Avenue now owns the Barney's brand, which still exists even if the stores do not. In September of 2023, the fast fashion monster Forever 21 announced a partnership with the Barney's brand, a sentence I never thought I'd write. The store that my mother used to find too intimidating as a kid has approved the collection for Barney's with a former fixture of malls everywhere, which is how the institution I'd most aspired to fit into for my whole life became aligned with a fast fashion clothing company that is notorious for consistently ripping off fashion designers of all stripes and using sweatshop labor to do it. After all this time, I can finally afford to buy stuff from Barney's, but it turns out I no longer want to. Alas, my own Jewish American dream is a modest one. To live in a city where mom and pop's stores stick around and workers get treated with dignity. Swimming in a pool of gold coins, after all, is at the very least unsanitary and at the most very painful.